Okay, Jennifer, if you would like
Okay,
to
I'll share my
go
screen.
ahead.
Brilliant. Hopefully you can see that. Give a thumbs up, Andrew, if
Yeah,
you've got that.
yeah, we can
Lovely,
we can see that.
lovely stuff. Right. So I just got to minimize this so I can actually, oh, sorry, get this out of the way. Right. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody, and for inviting me to come and speak to you this evening. My name's Jen Gilbert. I am the Cotswolds Landscape Officer for Butterfly Conservation. I've been working for Butterfly Conservation since 2017. Moved up here to work on the back from the Brink project initially, where I was doing more of the community engagement side of things. And my colleague Julian was doing a lot more of the on-the-ground conservation work, including for the Duke of Burgundy. So much of what I'm going to be talking about tonight is sort of a follow-on from that and from a lot of other work that's gone on in the Cotswolds up till now. So just wanted to set the scene for you to see how our butterflies are doing and why we really need to step in and try and help this particular species. So Butterfly Conservation every so often release a report entitled The State of the UK's Butterflies. They do one for moths as well, but this particular butterfly one, the last one was done in 2022. And it's a real overview of how our butterfly species are doing across the UK. And you can pull out some quite interesting and perhaps slightly depressing statistics from it. So the report found that actually 80% of all of our butterfly species have decreased in either abundance or distribution, or both those measures, since the 1970s. So that's, we have, I think it's 58 butterfly species. Some of those are, or a couple of those are migrants, but 80% of those have decreased in one way or another. And that's quite an interesting thing to look at, because up until perhaps more recent years, we were really seeing the declines in more of our habitat specialist butterflies. And we often split our butterflies, and I'm sure you probably know this, into sort of two categories. We've got the wider countryside butterflies and the habitat specialists. So those are really dependent on what their larvae feed on. So our adult butterflies, not that fussy, particularly in terms of their nectar plants. So they'll nectar on many different things, but it's the plant that the caterpillar will feed on which restricts where a butterfly species is found. So something like your peacock and your small tortoiseshell, which feed on stinging nettles, and then meadow browns that feed on a range of coarse grasses. Those plants are obviously widespread and are found across the country, so in lots of different habitat types. So those are your wider countryside species. Whereas your habitat specialists are your things that where their caterpillars only feed on maybe one or two specific plants. And then those plants only grow in specific habitats or on specific soils, such as like the small blue, whose larvae only feed on kidney vetch. So those butterflies are very much restricted to calcareous grasslands. So it's quite alarming to see that so many of our butterfly species, both the habitat specialists and the wider countryside species, are seeing declines. But going back to the habitat specialists, they, as you might expect, because they are so niche, they are so restricted in their distributions, they have declined dramatically as well. So you can see there that their abundance has decreased by over a quarter, and the distribution by over 2/3 since 1976. So quite alarming statistics, basically. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you, but one of the major drivers in our species declines is due to habitat loss. Habitat destruction, modification, fragmentation, changes in land management, anything which disrupts the nature of the habitat that they rely on, has really driven a lot of these declines. So what are we as Butterfly Conservation trying to do? So we have, in just the past couple of years, released our latest strategy. So this is all about sort of putting in place our goals for the next few years and trying to guide our work to actually save our butterflies and moths. So if you were to have a look at our strategy, it comprises 3 separate goals. The first one is to halve the number of the UK's threatened species of butterflies and moths. So a lot of work went into discussing and pinning down which our most threatened species were. So a lot of discussion, a lot of consultation within BC, but also within branches and other species experts. And we have a list of 71 species. Majority of those are moths. And the aim is to try and halve that number and get the half of those increasing again and sort of sustainable populations again. The second goal is about improving our landscapes. So again, we drew up a list of, I think it's actually about 120 of our most important landscapes for our butterflies and moths. And the aim is to improve the condition of these. So that will obviously support not just the rare species, but all sorts of other species as well. And then the third goal is about more about getting people involved. So this is to transform 100,000 wild spaces across the UK. So this is gardens, school grounds, any wild space that can be transformed and made better for our butterflies and moths. There's a dedicated wild spaces team and a new wild spaces website. So if you happen to have a wild space, a garden, doesn't have to, it can already be transformed and doing its job for butterflies and moths. You can register it. You can find out information about how to go about transforming your wild space. And I think you can even like put up photos and sort of be mapped and contribute to this target. So as you can probably tell, these are pretty ambitious targets, and the strategy runs to 2026. So we're already getting towards the back end of this. So I suspect these goals will continue into the future. But I think it is important for us to be ambitious because it really drives what we do, and we, you know, it really gives us something big to aim for. So in terms of Gloucestershire, I mentioned we had this list of 71 threatened species. So having a look at what we've got here that's on that list, and this is just talking about the butterflies now. So the 4 on the list that we have in Gloucestershire are the Duke of Burgundy, the marsh fritillary, the large blue and pearl-bordered fritillary. There are a number of moth species, but we're not looking at those tonight. And in terms of our priority landscapes in Gloucestershire, well, of course, we've got the Cotswolds, but also there's another landscape that's been highlighted that takes in the Forest of Dean, because we obviously didn't want to miss out that really important landscape. And it actually encompasses some of the woodlands into South Wales and up into the West Midlands as well. So it's quite an extensive landscape. But obviously, my role is focused on the Cotswolds. And in particular, tonight, I'm talking about Duke of Burgundy. So how do we basically go about doing this? So it's in previous years, in sort of years gone by, we really concentrated, I suppose, on our nature reserves, on our best sites, on our triple SIs, and looked after those very, very diligently, of course, and which you obviously have to do, and we don't want to stop doing that. But in 2010, there was the Lawton Review published, and it was all about how we needed to do better. So we needed to look outside of these core habitats. And there was a real important tagline that came out of this, which was about the aim that we needed to get to, which was to have more, bigger, better, and more joined up sites. So there was then this sort of shift of focus from just these individual sites to looking at this landscape scale, and thinking about sites as forming a sort of network across a landscape. So this diagram to the right, which I've sort of stolen from the report, hopefully explains that a bit better. You've got the, your nature reserves, your core areas, some of your best habitat. And this is sort of idea depicted here is about how we go about creating this network, this better, bigger, and more joined up network. So creating buffer zones around your core areas, looking at creating stepping stones between some of these core areas, looking at how you can connect them up better. So whether that's through things like field margins or hedgerows, how can we actually make these two sites connect? And looking at other sites which might not be in such good condition anymore, but that could be restored. So all of these things together would hopefully create a more functioning landscape. So that's what we obviously term landscape scale conservation. So we're looking across to coordinate our conservation and management across the landscape, and focused on a network of sites rather than just individual pockets of habitat. And we do this because this then basically allows that movement of species throughout the landscape. I'm sure I don't need to tell you, any of this, but this is sort of just setting the scene. Having these stepping stones, having these corridors, we can allow individuals to move, and we can allow this metapopulation structure to really work. So a lot of our butterfly species really do rely on being part of a metapopulation, and that's where you've got individual, often maybe small populations dotted about, but where you've got a lot of good habitats, you've got pockets of habitat and you're working to connect them up. It allows then these metapopulations to move, and if management declines on one particular site, they have other places that they can move to. So you've got this metapopulation structure going on where some might go extinct and other new sites they'll move to other new sites, and just have that flow through the landscape. So that's what we're aiming for. So we really want to do this in sort of 2 stages. Obviously, we don't want to forget our core sites. Those are often the best and perhaps the biggest populations. So we want to make sure we're still looking after our SSSIs and our nature reserves. So we want to make sure we are using that targeted management on those sites to make sure the habitat is in its best condition as it can be to support those existing populations. Just got a nice picture here from Painswick Beacon to sort of give the idea of maybe one of our best sites and looking out over the landscape and sort of giving a picture of how we can visualize movement through that landscape. And so we'd look after our core sites, but then look to improve connectivity. So whether that's within the site, so if there's a big site, but there's a barrier, a woodland between them, and you can open up a nice ride between them to allow the existing population to find another part of that site, that's improving connectivity, but also, as I say, between those sites, so across the landscape as a whole. So moving on to the species we're obviously looking at tonight. So the Duke of Burgundy. I'd probably, if I was in the room, take a show of hands as to how many people have actually been able to see Duke of Burgundy, but I can't see you all at the moment. So I won't ask that, but hopefully some of you have seen the butterfly. I know, Andrew, you'll be looking for that this year. This is the Duke of Burgundy. It's a really small little butterfly. This lovely checkerboard, orange checkerboard effect on top of a brown background, very pretty little thing. And it's actually not a fritillary. That was its old name. It was originally thought to be a fritillary, as it looks quite similar to some of our other fritillaries, but is actually part of the metalmark family. And it's actually the only UK representative of this this family of butterflies in the country. It's found in 2 different types of habitat. I'll go more into detail about its habitat requirements, but you do get grassland colonies and woodland colonies. They can be found on scrubby grasslands or in woodland clearings. I believe they were much more woodland butterfly some years ago, and due to loss of woodland, traditional woodland management, far fewer woodland colonies still around now, and much more known as sort of a grassland species, especially here in the Cotswolds. So the best time to be looking for them is sort of May into June. They can emerge at the end of April, obviously depending on how the weather is, but that's when the adults will be flying. This diagram at the bottom there just sort of shows you the months in which each life stage is around. So you've got the adult from perhaps end of April through to June. The caterpillar, the be laying eggs, caterpillars will be munching all the way through the summer, and then pupating towards the end of the summer. And that's how they spend the winter. They overwinter as a pupa somewhere down in the sward, and that's how they see out the winter and emerge as the adult the next spring. If you are looking for dukes, you're probably more likely to see males. They are the ones that are usually much more prominent. They'll do this perching behavior. They'll sit on this low-growing scrub. They're very territorial. They're keeping an eye out for females going past, and will dash off to follow a female as they fly past. So it's normally the males that you're more likely to see. The females are much more elusive, staying a lot close to the ground, and generally, usually they're looking out for cowslips to lay their eggs on. So not as often seen. They are very difficult to tell between. They are pretty similar. There are some subtle differences in brightness and wing shape, but the one feature that I do like, although you still need to get a pretty good view or get a good photograph to actually see this difference, but the males actually have just 4 legs. They've just got 2. Well, they have all 6 legs, but the first pair are sort of really reduced, so they kind of look like little T-Rex arms, whereas the females have the 3 pairs of legs. So if you get a nice side-on view, nice side-on photo, you should be able to then decide if you're looking at a male or a female. And the larval food plants are primula species. So on grasslands, that's cowslips, and in woodlands, that will be primroses. And the caterpillars, they feed, and they make a really distinctive feeding pattern. So you can't quite see it there, but what they'll do is they'll munch holes in the leaf, but they don't really like to go through the veins. So they usually leave this sort of lacy pattern on a leaf. So it's actually a way that we can survey for Duke of Burgundy even after the adults have finished flying. And it also is quite good to look for larval feeding damage, because where you might see the dukes flying, which, as I say, is often the males, can be in a completely different area to where the females are laying their eggs. So understanding where the territories are and where the breeding habitat is can be really important and help you really manage the site best for this species. So in terms of the national picture for the Duke of Burgundy, as you can see there from this map, it's really quite restricted. Much of the populations colonies are within central southern England, with a few sort of outlying colonies further north. But the Duke of Burgundy was known as one of our fastest declining butterflies, and when they were last sort of assessed back in sort of 2019, it was found that they had declined by 36% in abundance and 89% decline in distribution. So not only were we seeing populations getting smaller, we were seeing sites going completely extinct and range sort of contracting, basically. So we did obviously have a lot more coverage of the UK with Duke of Burgundy at one point, and now we have this much more restricted range. In terms of Gloucestershire, this was looked at properly last in 2013. It was found that we had lost 72% of known colonies. I think that was 65 colonies had gone extinct up until that point, and I think we were left with 25 in 2013. So quite a dramatic decline as well. And where we knew why those declines were, why those sites had gone extinct, it was found that 29% of those had been lost to a lack of management. So obviously that's basically no management happening, lack of grazing, so grass growing long, swamping out the cowslips, scrub encroachment, and just generally losing that open grassland. And conversely, a number of sites were found to have been lost to overgrazing. So obviously, you know, being grazed too heavily, too short, losing that structure, losing the food plants, the cowslips. So as you'll see, they are quite a fussy little butterfly, needing the exact right sort of level of management. So what are we aiming for? What do they actually need? This couple of pictures here, nice example of some Duke of Burgundy habitat. They are very much found, and we're talking just about the grassland butterflies now, the grassland colonies, which I'm focusing on. They like to be on chalk or limestone grasslands where there is extensive areas of scrub or shelter or topographical shelter. They like to have the sward height sort of medium height, as opposed to something like the large blue, which likes very short swards. And they like that sward to be interspersed with scattered scrub or scrub around the edges. And that's really because not only do the Duke of Burgundy males like to perch, but that also helps keep the cowslips in good condition. So as I say, they need abundant cowslips, as that's their larval food plant. And generally, we find them on north facing grasslands. And this is really all about the cowslips and making sure, and the cowslips being in good condition for the caterpillars once they emerge and ready to start eating. So if you had like a lovely south facing grassland covered in cowslips, the high likelihood is that you won't find Duke of Burgundy there. And that's really because if you think about how long the cowslips have been flowering before the caterpillars are ready to have hatched and are starting to eat in about June time, they will have been flowering for a good couple of 3 months up until then. And the south facing slope, the sun will have been baking down on that slope, and those leaves will just have pretty much dried out and would just not be palatable enough for the caterpillar. So a combination of more west, some north facing slopes, that medium height sward, that scattered scrub, it all just keeps the cowslips in better condition. Basically, the cowslips within higher sward will grow bigger. That sort of microclimate around the plant, where they're within thicker sward, surrounded by a bit of scrub, will be more full of moisture, so the leaves will stay juicier, basically, for the caterpillars, so that by the time, as I say, the caterpillars are ready to start eating, those cowslips are the ones that they want, the ones that they'll go for. So really, the general management aims for a Duke of Burgundy site is to have this mosaic of open sunny grassland with those abundant cowslips, medium height swards, and we're talking sort of range. We don't want it all one height, but a range of sward heights between sort of 5-20 centimeters, with scrub edges or patches, that sort of scattered scrub effect. So you're probably getting the idea that the Duke of Burgundy is a bit of a Goldilocks butterfly. Not too much scrub, not too little scrub, not too high grass, not too short grass. They're a little bit on the fussy side, but we do love them. So it's all about just getting that habitat to the right sort of level, not letting the scrub get too much, and so that we're keeping it nice and open. So in terms of what I've been doing, so that's obviously set the picture of the situation for Dukes and why we need to be helping them. So firstly, I needed to look at where I really wanted to target our efforts with this new project that I was embarking on. So a combination of things used to identify where to target. Some years ago, a study was done, desktop study was done of where our Duke of Burgundy sites were across Gloucestershire, with the idea of grouping them into sort of discrete networks, as you can see on that map. So these are nearby sites, near enough for population exchange, basically. So I think there's 8 shown on there. I think there's a few more further south, but this is a snapshot of about 8 discrete networks there. So looked at where those were and what sites were included in them. Also had a look through and mapped all of our known Duke of Burgundy records, current ones, historic ones, to see where the spread of records were. And also got a lot of information through our key site surveys. So the Gloucestershire branch have been doing key site surveys across Gloucestershire for many years now, and so have a huge amount of knowledge of all of these sites and where all our rare and threatened butterflies are. So that was very useful in focusing some of the effort. So there's a lot of information on how some of these known sites have been faring, and over the years some of them have been seen to be declining. So it was quite good to be able to focus some of our efforts on those ones that we know are declining in habitat quality. So then I'll go back a second. Oh, too far. When I was working on Back from the Brink, we were doing a lot of work around the Painswick Valley network, sort of down to the Nailsworth Valley area. It wasn't just Duke of Burgundy, but that's really where we were focusing our efforts. And given that Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust and the National Trust do a lot of work in the sort of the central Stroud area as well, I thought it would be nice to sort of move away from that area to an area which we haven't really had too much involvement with landowners, and that was sort of around the Cheltenham area. So this is a bit zoomed in. Hopefully you can get an idea of where we're looking. Cheltenham and Gloucester here. There's our Prestbury Hill Nature Reserve, just to the east of Cheltenham. And you can see the spread of Duke of Burgundy records. They're not all current. Some of these will be historic, but I focused on about 3 or 4 of these discrete networks. I think we've got the Southam and Whittington network, the Cobberley network, Churn Valley network, I think, and the Barnsley network, I think, created quite a nice discrete area to focus my efforts on. So got the area, know what I'd like to do. Basically, I had to basically do a development stage. So before you can do any of the work that you want to do to actually get these sites into better condition and then to look at joining them up, you've got to do a lot of development work. So that's getting your baseline surveys, your information up to date about how all of these sites are doing. So I was able to apply to the FIPL Fund, which is the Farming in Protected Landscapes Programme. That's a fund administered by the Cotswold National Landscape, and they were able to fund some of my time to actually put into this development stage and do all this groundwork ready to then deliver some of the management, which is what I'm now coming on to. So we got this bit of funding, and the first port of call really is to start making contact with the landowners. So many of these sites, I think I started off with that map previously was about 39 sites. I think I whittled that down to 30 sites, which were still had Duke of Burgundy and still had potential to have Duke of Burgundy. Of that, then got in contact with 20 landowners. I think we got 18 responses, all of which were really enthusiastic. And that's been one of the nicest parts of this project, is to see how much enthusiasm there's been from these local landowners to actually want to be involved with the project. So some of these landowners didn't even know they had Duke of Burgundy on their land. Some knew they had, but hadn't seen them in many, many years, and we happened to rediscover them, which was really exciting. And although they don't necessarily have the ability to manage the sites themselves or the ability to put the money in to then do some of the management, my job is next to look for funding to help with that. They still really wanted to be involved and help where they can. So I think that killed us about 27 sites to work on. So also got permission for surveys, and with the help of a number of volunteers, we've carried out time counts and habitat assessments across all of these sites. So as you can imagine, that's quite the effort, and took all the way through last spring and summer. Off the back of that, I then wrote up all the results, individual reports for landowners, which included not only what we'd found, but the management advice as well. So and ways of actually implementing that management advice. And as I say, that's the step that I'm at now, is following up with some of these landowners and actually looking to put some of this management in place. So having a look at some of the surveys that we've been doing, and I know quite a few of you on this call will be very familiar with this, but so we did time counts on each one of these sites, as I say, with the help of many volunteers. This basically involves just having to do one visit, one survey at peak flight time. The idea is you walk a zigzag route through the site or through the Duke of Burgundy habitat on a site. You note your start and your finish times, and you count the number of dukes that you see along the way. It's a very simple survey, and as I say, you only need to go and do this once. You can return if the weather's just got bad as soon as you got there, or you think you haven't quite hit peak time. But it's not like a transit. You don't have to. We're not doing this week in, week out. So it's like a snapshot of how the dukes are doing on any one site. And with the start and finish times, we're able to extrapolate a number of dukes seen per hour, which then that will give us estimated population size. And one of the new nifty little tools that we used this year, thanks to Brian, who I think I did spy earlier, was to use a new free app on our smartphones. So part of this survey requires us to map where we've walked through a site, which is always really tricky. But with this new app, you could just press record, put it in your pocket, and make your way around the site. And as you can see on this particular site, you can see my wiggly walk through this site, which is a site called Shill Hill. It also allows you to note things along the way. So those 4 yellow dots are where I've taken basically a grid reference of where I've seen a Duke of Burgundy. So that's really useful as well. So that notes where those are. And then all the volunteers were able to upload these files, send me these files, and I can put them onto our mapping software, which has actually been quite the game changer. And everybody found that really easy to use. So that's been really good. The second type of survey we've done are the habitat condition assessments. So as the name suggests, this allows us to determine the condition, basically the suitability of any one habitat patch for Duke of Burgundy. So I don't normally like having pictures of me taken, but one of my colleagues insisted, so that we actually had an example of a drop disc being used in the field. And this was one particular site where dukes hadn't been seen, or perhaps that some people hadn't visited for a very long time, privately owned site. As you can probably see from that picture, very rank, hadn't been managed in a long time, really tall grass, not many cowslips, and yet we still managed to find 7 Duke of Burgundy using this particular area. So quite amazing to see that they were still hanging on, but probably just still hanging on. So hopefully we'll be able to do something for them there. So the aim is, again, similar to the timed count. You're basically walking a route through the habitat, and in this case, stopping every 20 paces to take some measurements. So using that drop disc, taking the vegetation height, that's just a simple standardized weight. I think it's about 20 grams to the weight of that disc that you drop it down the stick. That's marked with your centimeters, and then you can read off the height of the vegetation from that. So that's quite a nice standardized method of getting the idea of the bulk of vegetation. At that point, you also then take a look at a 1 meter radius around that point that you've stopped, and you basically are then ticking presence or absence of some of these other attributes that the Duke needs. So are there cowslips at this point? Is there any scrub? Is there any evidence of grazing? It might be worth saying that actually, having done all of these, we do need to tweak this a little bit, but it's certainly given us a really good idea of how these habitats are doing. So we're then able to work out how frequent each of these attributes are across the site. So we get a percentage, and we can then allocate a category to each of these. So for example, with cowslips, if there was less than 20% found, then we would say that's in the red category, and amber 20 to 60, green above 60% cowslips. And then from that, we're then able to give the site an overall status. So red, you're talking really declining, in need of some serious management intervention. Amber, not doing too badly, but could really do with a bit of help. And green, quite happily ticking over, probably still being in good management. So what did we actually find? So this was then whittled down to the sites that we were able to survey, we got permission for. We surveyed 27 sites, and this map, as you can see, shows where we found Duke of Burgundy present and where we didn't. So of these sites, there were 18 that had Dukes present and nine absent. Some of them we were expecting to not find them. Some of them we were expecting to find them and unfortunately didn't. And others actually the converse. We weren't expecting to find them at all, and almost and pretty much rediscovered them, which was really nice. In terms of the population sizes of these 18 sites, 10 of them were small populations of dukes, so less than 10 dukes seen per hour. 8 were medium-sized colonies, that's 10 to 30 seen in an hour, and only one of them would be classed as a large colony. So as you can see, most of our colonies in Gloucestershire are on the small side, which is pretty standard for Duke of Burgundy, but obviously it'd be nice to have some larger colonies so they still could do with a bit of help. In terms of the habitat condition, we found that 8 of these sites we classed as red, so that needing urgent intervention. 15 were amber, so doing pretty well, but needing that additional management to stop any further decline. And actually, we didn't find any, as our current habitat assessment stands, that were actually perfectly green. As I say, the methodology is going to be tweaked slightly for this year, because there were some attributes that we could do with measuring a bit better. But generally, all of these sites need continuing and ongoing management. Before I move on from this, I do want to flag that the volunteer help, because with that many sites, there would be no way I could have got around not even half of them myself. So had a huge amount of volunteer help. I know some of you on the call help with these as well. And I think it was something like over 80 hours, which was basically almost 11 extra days worth of time given to this project. So really, really important to have people's help with this. Oh yes. So I just wanted to put up a few pictures of some of the sites that we surveyed, and have a look at actually how they fared in terms of the habitat assessment. These two here on the left, privately owned sites, but they actually are just adjacent, so and look completely different. There were historic records for this area, but I don't think they were that recent. I don't think anybody had necessarily been there in recent years. So we went there not really expecting to find anything or many. And on this site, we ended up finding 20 Duke of Burgundy in our walk around it, which was absolutely amazing. Really lovely site. And in terms of how it fared for the other attributes, as you can see, color-coded them, color-coded each one. The average height, nice and in the middle of that 5 to 20 centimeter range. The height, in parts, just outside of the range, but generally not too bad. Cowslips, almost 80% cowslips on this site, so that's really good to see. But the scrub, as you can see, quite a lot of gorse there, which already had encroached quite a bit on this area, and is probably bordering on too much, so needs a little bit of management. So overall, classing this as a good site, but needs a bit of management to keep that gorse in check and perhaps break it up a little bit. The other site, which basically adjoins it, I mean, if I go back, you can see looks completely different. It's devoid of any of this lovely structure of this scrub. And when we did a walkover, but we did a time count, no dukes whatsoever, even though these are basically, they are adjoined. There's just a fence in between them. So no dukes on here at all, although the range and the height's pretty good, still within those levels. Cowslips were great. There's plenty of cowslips through here, but absolutely no scrub. So you've got none of that shelter, none of that lovely cover, none of those perching points for the males. So overall, scoring classed as red. And what's nice about this site is that the farm manager is really keen to help and do what he can. He doesn't necessarily want volunteer groups going in, but he's more than happy to do some scrub management himself. So I'll be hopefully meeting up with him very soon. We'll be having a visit to have a look at what gorse could be taken out. It could be possible to get this into good condition for dukes. It would probably need a case of, because I know sheep do graze through here, I assume they do get up onto this slope, relaxing that grazing and letting that scrub develop a bit. But we'll have to see what we can achieve. But and it's also quite interesting to point out that this is actually a south-facing slope, so that kind of blows that that textbook. They want the west-facing slope out of the water there. This one here is the west-facing slope. So Obviously, this has got enough shelter and enough cover that the cowslips are still staying in good condition. Over here, oh, that's Crickley Hill. No, it's not. It's Charlton King's Common. I think this is the eastern end, and obviously really good site for dukes. In terms of the heights, average really good. Some of the areas are a bit ranker, a bit longer, so pushing it outside of what's ideal. Cowslips could be a little bit better. And in terms of how much scrub we found, quite high. But then Cheltenham Borough Council manage this site and have been for obviously many, many years, and manage this with Duke of Burgundy and adders in mind, and do rotational scrub clearance, and have got a lot more happening this winter as well. So that's very much in hand, which is great. And this site at the bottom is the one that the picture of me taking the habitat, doing the habitat assessment, another part of it. It's probably not that easy to tell, but this is very rank. It was very high all the way through. We did find 7 dukes, but generally range of heights, very few cowslips, quite a lot of scrub coming through, as you can see. So overall, sort of red. So that is one that needs some quite urgent intervention. The only problem with that, and as you work with landowners and across a landscape, you get various things sort of popping up and sort of getting in the way of what you'd like to be able to achieve. And unfortunately, although the landowner was really keen, they've just had to sell up. So hopefully I'll be put in touch with the new landowner, who will hopefully be just as interested, and then maybe we can look to do some work to restore that habitat. So in terms of, we've done the habitat assessment, that gives us an idea of what needs doing. So then I'm able to give management advice to the landowners in the form of reports and follow-up conversations with them afterwards. So as I'm sure is no surprise to you, one of the major things is grazing. Keeping our grasslands in good condition really is reliant on obviously avoiding excessive scrub encroachment, and one of the ways to do that is to have them grazed, which is tricky. There aren't that many available grazing animals, especially not conservation grazing herds. But ideally, what you would want for a Duke of Burgundy site would be to have it grazed with cattle or ponies. Reason being is that the way they graze, by sort of pulling and tearing at the vegetation, you get that variation in height of vegetation, rather than sheep, which will graze and create very short, very uniform sward heights. A lot of these sites, though, really aren't ready for grazing, so they perhaps aren't fenced. There's no permanent water supply, which you need for cattle. So in a lot of cases, it's looking to get that infrastructure in place before we can even get any grazing animals on the site. And making sure that the timing is right as well. So when you've got Duke of Burgundy on site, you don't want to be grazing during the flight period. So it would be looking at that sort of autumn, winter grazing time. Scrub removal has been a big part of management advice to a lot of sites. As you've sort of seen, where they aren't managed, we are getting that scrub encroachment. And just for example, this was the site I actually showed before, and they actually got their own funding to get a contractor in and do some scrub removal work. But they asked myself and Chris Wiltshire, our county butterfly recorder, to visit and actually map out where to take out the scrub. So we put together a full plan of where to thin out and break up and push back this scrub, because as you can see, that's really encroached on that would have been open grassland. And they did that last winter, I think it was. And so it will be really interesting to see how the Duke of Burgundy is responding to that this year, because it's much more open now. And where there aren't many cowslips, if any, you can always look to bring in plug plants or potentially even seeding. So that's an option as well that I've put to some of the landowners. But implementing it is obviously a different issue. We've got a lot of very keen landowners, but we don't want to be saying they have to do this off their own back. Most people wouldn't be able to afford to do this off their own back. So how do we actually get some of this stuff achieved? Well, the obvious one is getting some volunteers in and actually doing some hands-on work parties, cutting back scrub. And I've got that planned for a couple of sites, hopefully to be done before the end of this winter season. We're out at one site with the Gloucester Vale Conservation Volunteers this Sunday at a site which has become really encroached by the surrounding woodland. So we're going to be out there on Sunday actually cutting a lot of that back, starting. There's plenty to do, but we'll make a start on it to really try and open that back up. We're also going to look to, at some point, punch a hole through the surrounding woodlands to the rest of their land where they're doing a lot of wildflower reseeding, and actually try and better connect it. As I'm talking about the connectivity, that's an opportunity to better connect that isolated site with the surrounding countryside. And one of the things that I will be focusing on a lot in the coming weeks is looking to get some funding applications in to actually support this management. So putting in water troughs, which can involve digging pipelines from water mains, is, as I'm sure you can imagine, not cheap, nor is putting up fencing or paying for grazing. So I'll be putting together funding applications for individual sites to actually try and get this infrastructure, this work done. And I'm also working with the National Trust, who have their grazing herd of belted galloways, to see if they can support this project into the future. I'm sure most of you know that they use the belted galloways on a number of sites across Gloucestershire, and they're currently pretty much at their limit of how many they can cover, but they're really keen to help with this project. So, and they're growing the herd all the time. So hopefully by perhaps next winter or the one after, we'll have some grazing infrastructure in place on some sites, and then can get the cattle on. And then encouraging landowners to go into agri-environment schemes. So, go into countryside stewardship agreement where they get paid for actually doing certain things to support wildlife. So plenty of these sites that I've been working with are already in agri-environment schemes, but as they come up for renewal, I'll be working with farm advisors and the landowners to make sure that they're putting their land into the best options for Duke of Burgundy. And that's just an idea of some of the things that you can get paid for which would benefit the Duke of Burgundy. So management of species-rich grassland, managing successional areas and scrub, and you can even get paid for specific tailored management for threatened species such as Duke of Burgundy. So there are some that are coming up for renewal, and hopefully we'll be able to make sure we put them into the right options that will support Duke of Burgundy. And then looking further ahead, obviously I talked about working at a landscape scale being sort of a two-stage process. So looking at, initially we've been focusing on these individual sites and working with the landowners to make sure they don't decline any further and we restore them. But then I will want to be looking at improving the connectivity between these sites. So this is just a map which is a fairly quick and sort of crude method of seeing what the distances between occupied sites, those ones in purple, and the unoccupied sites. And so how far do Duke of Burgundy's have to go to actually find these sites? That gives us an idea. Duke of Burgundy can comfortably disperse. I think it's up to about 4 kilometers if they're looking for new habitat. So this will be a case of looking at, well, where can we create those connections? Some of these are, pretty nearby, so probably wouldn't be too hard for them to disperse. But are there any barriers in between these sites? Do we need to create something like we've done here at Rough Bank, punching a hole through some scrub or through some woodland, to allow the movement of these butterflies, so they don't just come up against a wall and can't then find their way onto a new site. It would be a case of looking for potential opportunities with either the landowners themselves, because they will no doubt have larger land holdings than just the area that we find dukes on. Can we look at doing things like field margins, gapping up hedges, anything that will actually create those corridors and can help our butterflies, and in particular the dukes, move through the landscape? But also looking for other opportunities with landowners we haven't approached yet, who may have little pockets of habitat that might not be duke habitat, but could just create those stepping stones through the landscape. So there's basically quite a lot of work to be done. And that is a fairly small area of the Cotswolds, and just the one species. But I think it's a really promising start, and with a lot of potential for actually doing some good things to support this particular species. So that's me. I don't know how long that's taken. I'm sorry if I've rushed that, and I'm happy to take plenty of questions if you'd like.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. That was really good. I'm going to suggest we just take a 5-minute break now before we do the questions.
Yeah.
You were basically bang on time. So
that's good, because I had no idea.
Yeah, you said just under an hour, and you are about 8 or 9 minutes short of an hour, which is perfect. So yeah, I have to we'll go back to the dukes now. We've got some questions already. To start with, Diane, would you like to raise your question for Jennifer, please?
I just wondered what you thought on the grazing cattle or sheep, because I exercised like Cranham, talking to the old people way back. It was always sheep, and there was masses of cowslips. Over the years, they've had the belted Galloway, and now the villagers have now taken over the management because they weren't too happy with Natural England. But they said there is still quite a few cowslips, but not like they were, talking to the 80, 90-year-olds that were resident and local. And they said before it was sheep always. And we have lost the bee orchids there from the cattle.
So I think a lot of the grazing, and I'm sure more of you will know this better than me, used to be sheep around these parts anyway, but and used to be a lot more extensive. I think it really depends what you're sort of aiming for. With the cattle, with a lot of our grasslands, and for a lot of our invertebrates, you really do want to make sure that you're keeping that structure in the sward. So you want to make sure that you're avoiding that uniform cropping that sheep can do. So that's where things like cattle and ponies can be quite good in that tearing action that does leave the bits higher, and their actual being heavy, that can also be very beneficial in breaking up thick thatch, you know, where it's got quite rank and quite thick sward. It can help open up patches of soil, so that can help plants germinate and things like that. You can sheep can most definitely be used for conservation grazing. They use them. Just thinking about Daneway Banks with the large blue. I think they predominantly have sheep. They might have ponies as well, but they do have sheep. It's just about getting the timing right and the amount of grazing right. So you don't want to go too long or too hard with lots of sheep, because then you'd perhaps lose that structure. And I believe they also have a tendency to nibble off flowers as well, whereas often I'm not a complete grazing expert, but this is what I understand, is that you don't have that sort of selective nature when it comes to cows and ponies quite so much. So yeah, I think you can use both. I mean, if we weren't able to get cattle or ponies for some of the Duke of Burgundy sites, I would not say no to sheep. It would just be keeping an eye on it so that we're not doing, you know, ending up with that uniform height across the site, really. So yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Okay, next up, David Cramp. Would you like to put your question to Jennifer, please?
I can read it if.
Where is David?
Just looking to see. No,
Might not have come back.
I can't see him at all.
Well, I can certainly just. It's obviously in the chat. So
Yeah, the question he's asking is, how do you assess the percentages of cowslips and scrub on the site?
yeah, I didn't want to sort of go into too much detail, because I thought it would be a bit too much. But basically, it's simply each stopping point we're basically doing a tick or a cross for presence or absence of cowslips or scrub. So then you can basically assess, out of how many stopping points we did, how many had cowslips present, and therefore get a percentage in that way. Same for all the other attributes as well. One thing we are, as I think I mentioned, we're looking to tweak this habitat assessment for this year. One of the limitations I found with it was that you would be just ticking yes or no to any type of scrub. So it could be a tiny little bit, or it could be a huge patch of bramble. And it was hard to then assess, because we want scrub, but we don't want too much, and we don't want too little. So there was no measure of amount of scrub. It was just yes or no. So we're going to be tweaking that to take that into account, to get a better picture of actual level of scrub within a site. Hope
Very
that
good.
answered that.
Message from Ali Clifton Barnard saying she's a new member, found it really interesting. She's had to leave, but thank you very much.
Oh,
So
thank you,
that's
Ali.
good news. Nigel is next up. Would you like to put your question to Jennifer, please?
You're muted.
Nigel, you're muted.
Right, try again.
Oh,
Okay.
I hope you can lip read. Yeah, I'm just wondering, we always hear about impacts of climate change on individual species, and I'm just wondering what, if any, impact climate change has had on Dukes of Burgundy and how you manage them.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think whether any specific effects have been found specifically for Dukes as yet. Others on the call may, thinking Sue or Trish might think differently. I know climate change has affected some of our other butterfly species. The one that comes to mind particularly is the wall butterfly. which the Duke of Burgundy only has one brood in a year, so they emerge, they breed, and then they overwinter as the chrysalis, ready to start again next year. The wall emerges, breeds, then they emerge again, so they have a second brood, and then they stop. I can't remember at what point in the life cycle they overwinter, whether it's a chrysalis or caterpillar, but the warm weather is actually basically convincing them to keep breeding. So they try to fit in a third brood. And because they are not then getting through to the stage at which they would normally overwinter, they're not seeing the winter out. And so on the inland sites that they used to breed at, they're actually being like wiped out because they are trying to get through to a third brood, and then those adults are just not able to see out the winter. So they are being there's certainly one species we are seeing being affected by climate change, and they're often they're more found on the coast now where they are cooler, and they're stopping their life cycle at the right time to then see out the winter. I would think that climate change could potentially have an effect on dukes in terms of drought. We were worried last year as to how they would have fared from the drought. I'm going to get my years mixed up. Was it the previous year? I can see Trish sort of nodding. Because obviously if you have a drought, then the food plants can desiccate and then not be palatable, not be able to then feed the caterpillars that are then emerging. We didn't see much of a knock-on effect last year of that. I think the drought that we did have, that very, very hot summer, probably, I think that was more in sort of July, August, so after the caterpillars would have fed and pupated. So in terms of dukes, it didn't seem to have much of a knock-on effect to them. But there could be other issues yet to be seen, in terms of getting out of sync with when cowslips are flowering and that kind of thing, with when the butterflies emerge or so I don't think, Stu or Trish, I don't think we've seen, I might be wrong. Has there been anything particularly?
I would just like to make the comment about nitrogen deposition, because that has been having quite a detrimental effect on quite a lot of butterfly species. I don't know how that impacts particularly on the Duke of Burgundy. You might have some ideas about that.
I'd have to ask some of my colleagues about that, I think, see if there's been any research done on that.
I think it makes the grass grow a lot.
Yeah, if the grasses grow stronger, they're going to outcompete the cowslips. So
that's kind of interesting, because
it
suggests that more good
we
weather.
definitely see some effects of it, but perhaps not directly to dukes just yet.
Yeah, that kind of suggests that more good weather isn't necessarily good for butterflies. Andy
I
Lewis.
sort of missed that.
Thanks. Thanks for that, Jens. Good overview there.
Thanks.
Landowners seem to be the key to this, as they are for many wildlife projects. What do you say to them to get them to sign up? What's in it for them?
I think people just like knowing that they're doing something and giving something back. That's really the response that I've got. I haven't really had to do a hard sell or anything to these landowners, which has been nice. Obviously I do make the point that, I'm not, this is more just getting an idea of what's happening on the site. This doesn't oblige you to do anything in particular. I'm not then going to say you have to do this, you have to do that, and then I'm not expecting you to pay for this. If we do want to do some management, the next step is to look at how we fund that. So it's sort of setting that out to begin with, that it's not like putting any obligation on them to do anything in particular. And it seems to be, I guess, just doing a survey and getting an idea of how things are going is quite a nice, easy thing for people to be okay with, and yeah, it's this next step of looking at what management needs doing, and I've got various meetings lined up with landowners coming up over the next few weeks to actually then look back over that management advice and see what they can help with. So I guess that will perhaps be the telling bit as to what we can then do after that. But it's been nice. There's been certain landowners who, one very big landowner around Charlton Abbots, who was so keen to do something. He immediately called up his neighbour to try and get his neighbour cows onto the site. So you know, quite happy just to take it into his own hands and try and get something going. So I think a lot of people are just quite pleased that somebody's interested, because these are often little bits of land that they're just not doing anything with, and can't really do anything with. So, which is helpful, I suppose. So yeah,
that's probably the best way, isn't it? If they're sort of buying into it just like that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, seems to be working so far.
Right. Yeah.
That was a really good question, Andy. For what it's worth, in the Rapture monitoring group, we found that if you start the conversation with landowners on the subject of barn owls,
Yes. Yeah.
the door's open. Everybody loves a barn owl. If you start with goshawks, you're not quite so likely to get a positive reaction. Jan,
it's almost a status symbol, isn't it, for some farmers?
It is, yeah. Having a
owls.
barn owl is great. If you're a gamekeeper, having a goshawk is not. Jan, you got a question to ask?
I have, thank you. Apologies if I missed it because I was unable to join at the start, but I was just interested in the fact that you found Duke of Burgundy butterflies quite close to where I live. In fact, somewhere I've been this afternoon, which is nice.
Nice.
I really enjoyed what I've heard of the talk, and I'm looking forward to listening to the rest of the recording that I missed. But I was just wondering if you're still going to be wanting volunteers in the summer.
Absolutely. You certainly wouldn't say no. No, I'm going to hopefully be doing more of the same this spring and summer, whether that's doing some more of the time counts or the habitat assessments. But yeah, always happy for new volunteers to come and help, because as you can see from that, that's a lot of sites to get round, and actually some sites we didn't get round. So there's other opportunities as well. So yes, if you'd like to, do drop me an email, definitely.
Yeah, thank you. I will.
What's the best way for potential volunteers to get in touch with any of you butterfly ladies to sort of help locally? What's the best approach?
You can just go directly to the branch, and then that would probably be filtered. What is our branch main email? I can't think off the top of my head. Trisha will know. Oh, you're muted, Trish.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, we're all on the Gloucester Branch Butterfly Conservation website. Email, I'm chair at gloucestershire-butterflies.org.uk, and Jen is your
I'll put it in the chat.
Put it in the chat. J Gilbert.
That's a good idea.
You're at Butterfly Conservation, because Jen's staff, she has a different email address to us as volunteers in the branch. But yeah, we can, if you put that in the chat, Gil. Oh yeah, you've put it already in here, Joe.
Yeah.
Well done.
But we're on the Butterfly Conservation Gloucester Branch website, so you can find all our email addresses that way. But yeah, I'm happy to be contacted about anything, put you in touch with Jen or whoever. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks very much. Juliet, you've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, because it was a great talk and I just wanted to ask so much. But anyway, I'll jump to my last question because it's something that came up just in what you've just been saying. Do they actually need the cowslips to flower? Or is it the quality of the leaf that's important?
Well, it's the quality of the leaf. That's actually one of the things we're going to be adding to the habitat assessment as well, because at the moment we are just looking at, are they here or are they not? But we do want to actually look at what are the size of the cowslip leaves. In terms of, do they need the cowslips to flower? Well, the caterpillars aren't feeding on the flowers like you know, like large blue feed on the wild pine flowers, but I think they'll, you know, flowering. You've got the potential nectar source and also the seed for the cowslips to increase. So we do want obviously the cowslips to be flowering, but in terms of the Duke of Burgundy and the caterpillars and what they eat, they are very much just eating the leaves. So it is the condition of the leaves. And I think there are studies which show. One of my colleagues did send it to me actually, and there is an optimum size of leaf that it appears that the Duke of Burgundy do aim for. So I think they are actually aiming when the females are laying, they are looking for those bigger plants and those bigger leaves and they lay their eggs in little batches sort of under the leaf.
I got visions of them going out with their tape measures now.
Yeah, no. Sometimes it is all a bit prescriptive, isn't it? But it gives us an idea of whether on a site, you know, are these cowslips actually going to support dukes or not really? So yeah.
Sure.
Very good. Andrew Herriot, you're up next.
Oh, hi, Jen. Thanks very much for the talk. Very informative, very enjoyable. I suppose my question is all about really the science, if you like, of management intervention and habitat management. I mean, is there an evidence base to say, you know, from work done elsewhere, as to what provides the best arrangement, the best regime for Duke of Burgundies, or indeed for other species, or is it case of getting a general idea and then sort of refining things as you go? Because, you know, I do a lot of habitat management for a number of conservation bodies, including butterfly conservation, and, you know, I go in there, do this, and we're slashing scrub left, right, and centre. We're doing whatever it might be, but, you know, how is it defined as to what is going to be best for the dukes?
Well, actually, a lot of what we do is underpinned by that research, by that science. So butterfly conservation generally work a lot with universities and academics, and there's we publish a lot of papers, do a lot of research all the while actually. And I know there are a number of papers on Duke of Burgundy, which actually we're referring to in refining this habitat condition assessment actually at the moment. So we're sort of looking into that research that has been done. But yes, so there is that backup from scientific research, but also I think with all conservation management, you do have that theory, you do have that idea of what does need to be done, but you do always want to be keeping an eye on things and tweaking sort of as you go. So yes, you've got that science, you've got that idea of what needs to be done, but yeah, it is refining as you go, I think, all the while with conservation work, because, you know, it can be potentially some research might have been done in a part of the country which is slightly different to conditions here. So yeah, it's a bit of, I suppose it's a bit of both in a way then.
But each site is different as well, isn't it, Jen?
Yeah, that too.
Each site is different.
You do have to be able to
wide range of variables and so
exactly. Yeah.
So, and just going on from that, I mean, in the work you've done so far, have you come across any conflicts with the management for any other species or ecosystems, which, you know, cause you to think, or maybe we should be doing this slightly differently, or perhaps the regime you put in place at Dukes is actually helping other species or something within a particular biome?
Yeah. So there are other species that will benefit from obviously different management, from more intensive management. I mean, a good example, and I think actually that's a question that is in here, or was perhaps that was, Juliet asked about contrasting needs as well. And the one that springs to mind in particular is where you've got large blue or some of our blue butterflies and Duke of Burgundy on the same site. As I mentioned, they've got very contrasting needs. Duke of Burgundy is much more that higher sward. They want more of the scrubby look. If you look at a Duke of Burgundy grassland, it does look like it's being undermanaged, whereas your blues, your large blues, like that much more shorter, which allows their food plants and the ants that they rely on to stay put, basically. So if you've got a large enough site, you can, like at Robborough Common, you can cater for those two different needs. Very usefully there, they've obviously got lots of different aspects with all the different combs and things. So the grazing regimes are different in different compartments there. So for like the large blue, it's yearly grazing, whereas for the Duke of Burgundy compartments, it might be once every two, possibly 3 years that they get grazed, because you don't want to hit them too hard. But yeah, it is important to be mindful of what else we're finding as we're going on these sites, so that we're not knocking out something that in the management that we're doing. I'd say like a lot of these sites are really quite undermanaged. So hopefully whatever we do will actually benefit a whole lot of species. And when it comes to dukes, they are a bit of an umbrella species for other things as well. So I think I mentioned that Duke of Burgundy work really well with the adder, because adders like that more mosaic of longer, shorter and scrubby edges. So those are two species that work really nicely together. So adders, having had declining hugely across the country and have been lost from various counties, that's one species we had on the Back from the Brink project, and it's always in the back of my mind. And working on dukes, it's something that I hope the work we do for dukes will benefit something like adders as well. And when you're keeping scrub and which is a big component of the Duke of Burgundy grassland, then you're keeping that type of habitat for all sorts of other things like birds and other invertebrates and things. So yeah, I think you do have to be mindful of what the contrasting needs of other things, but at the same time, dukes are a bit of an umbrella species for same habitat needs as quite a lot of other things as well.
Very good.
It's also complex, but it's also flipping fascinating, isn't it? And
It is.
I just love it, really. So
Yeah.
thanks very much for that, Jen.
No, that's all right.
Very good. Des, final question.
All right. Yeah, I was just interested in your measurements. You took four measurements and then produced an overall statistic for the habitats. I just wondered how you sort of combined them together to come out with an overall value.
So yeah, I've sort of skipped over a little bit there as well. There were a couple of other measurements in there, particularly whether there was grazing or not. So that I didn't put that on the slides, but I was taking it from another study on dukes that was done a few years ago, where they also used a traffic light system, and it was, I can't remember now, it's either 3 or more green is green, two or more is, I can't remember what it is, but it's however many ambers or reds you have, and then you then get your overall status. So I think I probably missed out the grazing aspect. So and that's how but it is something I have to say that we have done a little bit on the fly this year, because we had these condition assessments, and actually, although they'd been set up by Butterfly Conservation, nobody had actually really gone and looked at what the thresholds should have been. So this is another reason why we're working on them again this year. So it's been a bit of a quick exercise to decide what is a good percentage of each of these attributes, what is middling, what is poor, and then come up with an overall idea. So it has been, a few of my colleagues have talked this out, but we do want to refine it a bit better for next year. but it's given us a good starting point. And although it's not probably perfect, it has highlighted where, you know, the better sites and the sites that are really in need of that management.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I just wondered whether you have some sort of clever equation or algorithm that you sort of slotted it all into.
No, I don't think I'm clever enough for algorithms. No, it's just
Okay,
a number
thanks.
of
Yeah.
yeah. All right.
Very good. Well, Jennifer, that was brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Really
You're welcome.
appreciate that. That was more or less the perfect presentation and talk. Really, really good.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody else for turning out tonight and watching that. It makes it worth doing. The audience was 31 members, which is as good as we usually get, which is great. So I'd just like to say, would you please show your appreciation to Jennifer?
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much. I'm going to stop the recording